Welcome to Chess News 18. Today I want to take a look at a game that was played during the 5th round in the Sparkassen chess tournament in Dortmund between Luc van Wely from the Netherlands and Jan Gustafsson from Germany. Gustafsson won this game and is currently the leader of the pack over there in Dortmund. Now this was a rather unfortunate game for Luc van Wely because apparently he mixed up the move order in the opening. Okay, let's go to the game. Van Wely was playing white and he opened with c4. Gustafsson played e6, d4 was played, d5, knight c3, and now Gustafsson played c6, which is called the semi-Slav. And it is an introduction into a number of possible variations. For instance, knight f3 is very common here, when d takes c4 would be the note-wome variation. More common after knight f3 is of course knight f6, when with e3 and knight bd7 we have the old famous Miran variation of the Slav defense. But in this game, after c6, Luc van Wely opted for e4, e2, e4. And in a nice interview conducted by Chess Vibes, Gustafsson explains that he was Van Wely's second on a number of occasions, so it makes sense that he tries now the more unusual stuff. And this continuation, e2, e4, normally leads to a gambit, which is named after Marshall. So this guy has his name attached to at least 2 gambits. Okay, Gustafsson replied with d takes e4, knight takes e4 followed, and now bishop b4 check. And here Van Wely played bishop d2. Now this is the actual gambit. Also possible is, for instance, knight c3 to block the check. But then black can hope for a good game after c6, c5. Okay, so back to the gambit variation, the game variation, which is bishop d2. And now black takes on d4, winning a pawn. Now he has to part with the bishop pair, because white now plays bishop takes b4, and there follows queen takes e4 check. Now the theoretical line which is played here by Van Wely is bishop e2, offering another pawn here, because black can now take this one here on g2. But normally to take 2 pawns in such an opening is too much to ask from, in this case, the black position. 1 pawn you might just survive, but taking another is usually very dangerous in these gambit lines. So let's have a look at, for instance, what could happen if black takes here on g2. Now of course white protects the rook in the corner and attacks the queen at the same time with bishop f3. And now for instance queen g5 is possible, but now white really starts developing with knight e2, knight a6. These moves have been played before, but we can see that after rook g1, white really has a very nice defense and is chasing black's queen all the time. Queen f6 for instance here. Now bishop c3, blocking the long diagonal with e6, e5. Knight g3, looking to go to some nice white squares in the center. Also threatening this move, knight h5, which would double attack queen and pawn. So that explains g6 for instance. But after knight e4, black gets chased and chased, queen e7, queen d2 for instance. And now if black tries to prepare castles with his king either on queen side or on king side, white has a check on d6. So for instance bishop f5, when knight d6 would follow, king f8 only move, and after exchange on f5 and long castles, white really has a significant advantage, because this bishop on the black squares is really very active. It is looking at this pawn here and this rook, and the king here has some trouble going over to the g file because this white rook here is very active, and also these pawns here on the queen side are quite vulnerable, and white could maybe even try to take advantage of that with a move such as queen d7, etc, etc. And one other subline I would like to show you after queen d2, not preparing queenside castles, but for instance kingside castles with knight f6. And then white can also play the disturbing knight d6 check, and then after king f8, queenside castles, king g7 and rook e1, we can see that white is also more or less winning, because this pawn here is going to fall. Sorry, go back. This was the idea, and we can see that this bishop has a tremendous power. Okay, so that's just an indication of what could happen when black takes the second gambit pawn on g2. But in the game after bishop e2, Gustafsson does not play like that. He knows himself out quite well in these lines, and knight a6 is apparently the best theoretical recommendation, immediately harassing this very strong black squared bishop. Now I suppose there are two moves. An old line is, for instance, bishop c3, f6, knight f3, knight e7, castles kingside, rook e1, e5, which is an old game from Tallinn 1945 between Lilienthal and Kotov. And black can hope to survive the white initiative here. He has very nicely blocked the power of his bishop with his pawns here, and he's a pawn up, and it would seem that all his pieces have nice futures. You know, they can just go to good squares. This bishop has a nice diagonal. Maybe this knight can sometimes go here. Of course, you have to be careful of a move like bishop b4. Maybe this guy could go here, and at some stage maybe there will also appear a rook here on d8. So black is fine, I suppose. Well, after knight a6 in the game, Luke van Wely did not play bishop c3, but he played bishop a5. Now this is a very direct move, of course, because it threatens checkmate on d8 immediately. So Gustafsson played b6 to block the diagonal of the bishop, and now Van Wely ignores the attack on his bishop, and he plays now queen d6, seriously penetrating black's position here, and threatening something like rook d1 or sometimes queenside castles, and again a threat to checkmate on d8. Now Gustafsson defends in playing bishop d7, because this blocks the d file and also prepares, of course, queenside castling. Nonetheless, it would seem that b takes a5, so accepting the piece sacrifice is possible, and it can lead to very interesting complications. So for instance, the aforementioned rook d1 threatening the mate, f6 creating an escape square here. But now white harasses black's queen, which is the protector of the square on c6, so f3, queen e3, and now there follows a double attack with queen takes c6 check, king f7, and white can now take the rook in the corner with queen takes a8. So he has regained the sacrifice material. As a matter of fact, if I count correctly, he is up the exchange at the moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, and both sides have 6 pawns. But he has handed over the initiative to black somewhat here. And the game could follow with knight e7, for instance, and now knight h3, sometimes with the idea of going here, blocking the diagonal, so also enabling white to castle at some stage. But now black can play the interesting move queen b6, and this attacks the b2 pawn, but also protects the c6 square. So now black is playing with the idea of moving his knight to c6, which would really block out white's queen here. And then maybe black can even start to think about capturing the queen. So for instance, to protect the d pawn, rook d2, but then knight c6, which threatens things like knight c7 or first a protection of the rook with rook f8 followed by a bishop move to b7 for instance. And white can try to defend against that with knight f2, with the idea of jumping to e4 and then giving a check on d6, which would disturb black's plans. So black could play f5, preventing the knight from coming to e4. And then after castles, black can go for the queen here in the corner with c7. But white still has a saving tactic to his disposal, with c5, counterattacking black's queen. And when black's queen takes, the surprising rook d7 check. And of course, this attacks both king and knight, and the knight is the attacker of the queen here. So the most logical move would be to play bishop takes d7, but then of course white's queen is free and can now recapture the rook on h8. And yeah, black has one pawn and very nice, rather centralized pieces. Also, this knight here is not fantastic because it is still in a pin, and this bishop is not the best because it is looking at his own pawn here. So a very unclear position, and a very nice example of the variations that can occur after b takes a5, when black would accept the piece sacrifice. Okay, now back to the game. I'm trying to show you guys some more variations because the game itself was rather short, and so that's why I'm going into these sidelines a bit more today. So bishop d7 was played by Gustafsson, and now castles was played, of course threatening to take on d7, but black is in time because he can now castle queenside himself, and of course now the bishop on a5 is again in danger of being taken. So bishop c3 followed, and black followed up with f6, trying to block the radius here of the white bishop on c3. And according to theory, the best move now is queen a3. And let's have a look at that. Queen a3. This hits, of course, the knight here on a6, which is one of the weaknesses in black's camp. And notice that after queen a3, it is not possible to play queen takes c4. Sorry, no, I'm going a bit early. After bit fast. After queen a3, black first needs to protect his knight with king b7 like this. And only now, bishop f3 is a theorem move. And notice, that's what I wanted to say, that now queen takes c4 would be a horrendous blunder because white's bishop would simply move back to e2, and white would win the knight on a6 and the game also. So after bishop f3, black would have to play queen f4 check, and then after rook d2, notice that king b1 is not such a good move because of e5, which prepares to play bishop f5 with check, but rather rook d2, white has a very nice game. He's preparing to play knight e2 to attack black's queen, and to follow it with rook hd1 to double up on the d file, and if the knight is on e2, it can jump to d4 and attack e6, but also attack c6 in coordination with the bishop on f3, of course, and sometimes can also play knight b5 because the c6 pawn is pinned. So that would explain why black is getting out of the way with his queen as fast as possible. And then after knight e2, e5, black is just in time to stop the knight, you know, from really becoming very active. So probably we also have an equal game here. So as far as theory is concerned, this is the main line. But after f6, it seems that Van Wely mixed up the moves here. So he should have started with queen a3 and only then play bishop f3. But he first played bishop f3, and this is indeed a dubious move. because now Gustafsson simply could take the pawn on c4. Because if now bishop e2, then Gustafsson can play, for instance, queen takes a2, and there is no queen on a3, so the knight on a6 is in no danger. And indeed, Van Wely played bishop e2, but I think this was really the real mistake and also the losing move of the game. Probably Van Wely still didn't realize that something had gone wrong, because otherwise I suppose he still had gone for queen a3 at this moment, threatening again to play bishop e2. So then king b7 would not do, so black would have to play knight c7, so the knight would have to save itself. But then there could follow queen takes a7, and although black can now get rid of the danger on the queen side and offer an exchange of queens like this, white is much better off than in the game, where at a certain point he was down 3 pawns, and in this position he is only down 1 pawn. True, queens has been exchanged and black has a very solid pawn, but white has the bishop pair and much better chances of putting up a defense than in the game. So I suppose this was Van Wely's last chance to play after queen c4, queen a3. Never too late. Okay, so as mentioned, he played here bishop e2, and this is really losing now, because Gustafsson now takes on a2, and Van Wely now tries his last trick. Knight f3, knight c5, preparing an onslaught on the queen side against white's king here. You know, threatening moves like knight b3 check, and also e6 e5, when the bishop would come to this beautiful diagonal, checking maybe also white's king, and of course unleashing the power of this rook here against the queen. But Van Wely finds his last trick. He plays knight e5, but Gustafsson wants nothing of it. He wisely sidesteps f takes e5, because after bishop takes e5 all of a sudden he would be losing because of the mating threats on b8 and c7. He still could try queen a1, queen c2, queen a4, king b1, queen e4 check, bishop d3 to eliminate the attacking bishop on e5 with queen takes e5, but of course it would cost him the queen, and after queen takes e5 white has a winning material advantage. So as mentioned, he didn't play that. After knight e5 he played the much stronger knight e4, attacking everything in white's camp, the strong bishop and the knight here. And let's not forget that this knight also is still en prise. So Van Wely tried bishop c4, counter-attacking black's queen, but now with a few very precise moves Gustafsson wins the game. Queen a1 check, queen c2, and now Gustafsson can remove his own queen from the danger in playing queen a4 check. And now he is attacking both white's king and white's queen, so the only move that can solve that problem is bishop b3. But now Gustafsson plays a desperado, queen takes b3 check, and after king takes b3, knight takes d6, rook takes d6, f takes e5, black is a piece up. So after queen c2, Van Wely saw this coming, and after queen a4 check he resigned the game. So this meant that Gustafsson won his second game in this tournament, and that he is also topping the rankings now in Dortmund. Not a very difficult win, but a very welcome win for him, I suppose. Is it today that they play on? Today he is playing Lego, so let's see how he is doing there. And otherwise it is of course very interesting, very funny that the lowest ranked player at the moment is #1 over there. Okay, so please stay tuned for another installment of Chess News. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Please, until next time. Bye bye.